Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, broadcasting live from the Brisbane Powerhouse. Answering your questions tonight, the opposition spokesman on regional development and water, Senator Barnaby Joyce, the State Director of Queensland One Nation, Ian Nelson, Cape York businesswoman Gina Castellane, the National President of the ALP and Queensland Premier, Anna Bligh, and the newly appointed Climate Commissioner, Tim Flannery. Please welcome our panel. Okay, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We're simulcasting live across Australia on ABC News 24 and across the region on the Australia Network. And you can go to our website, I should say, to send your questions live and join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that's on your screen right now. Well, as we go to air tonight, a thunderstorm is raging over Brisbane, but it's the political storm over refugees and multiculturalism that's leading the political agenda. Our first question tonight comes from Oliver Squires.
Well, thanks, Tony. Barnaby Joyce, do you agree with Scott Morrison when he says that the asylum seekers from Christmas Island shouldn't have been able to attend the funerals of their family members? Or do you agree with Joe Hockey when he says he would never take away anyone's right to say goodbye to their loved ones?
Yeah, well, what we've got there is a misquote of what Scott said. He didn't say that they shouldn't attend the funeral. What he did say was that we should check the costs, and I think that is a fair statement. We're looking at about $14,500 per person, and I suppose the first question that could be asked is, could we have done it cheaper? And if you can do it cheaper and still bring the outcome, then that's a fair question to ask. With Joe,
How would you do it cheaper, by the way, just out of interest?
Well, I suppose you could take them on a commercial flight, Tony, as opposed to an RAF flight. There's a whole range of things that we could be looking at as to how we make sure that we don't spend all your money. We've got to try and make sure that in a nation that's in excess of $181 billion in debt, that we try to make sure every penny counts. This
is your quote from last week. The price of compassion is not limitless.
That's correct.
What's it mean, actually?
Well, it means, Tony, that you can't just say, well, I have an unlimited checkbook, that there is no end to the price I'm prepared to pay to bring about a certain outcome. You just can't do it. We are not dealing with my money, Tony, or your money. We're dealing with the taxpayers' money, and we have some sort of responsibility there, and people might spin that in any way, shape or form that they like. But we do have a job, and the moment we relinquish that job, we should give up being in Parliament.
Okay, Anna Bligh, you watched the whole, I think, rather unseemly episode over the drowned asylum seekers last week. Would you agree that neither side of politics came out of this very well?
Well, I'd probably use the word you did. I think it is unseemly to be debating the cost of funerals when children are attending the funerals of their parents, as some of these people were. Look, these are not easy questions, but ultimately I felt when I saw the footage of these people dying on our televisions, being smashed up against cliffs in terrible seas, reaching for their children, knowing that they couldn't get there, I felt sick, and I felt that none of us as Australians came out of it very well. And I look forward to hearing some of the outcomes of the reviews that are going into this.
How did you feel when the young orphan boy was bouncing across from one side of the country to the other and back, not knowing where he was going to end up?
Well, it's hard not to think that we couldn't do better.
Barnaby Joyce, I'll just come back to you just for a moment, because you said you're going to go to Senate estimates and try and uncover the cost of these funerals. That's still the plan, is it?
I think that, that is the forum, Tony, as you know. The forum for asking questions about what happens to your money in any side of politics comes from Senate estimates. And there is an expectation that people have a right to say, well, look, I want these questions asked. It's not a question of compassion. It's not a question of whether you believe it's right or wrong. It's a question that you're dealing with other people's money, and they have a right to know how you're dealing with it, because you've got to pay it back at the end of the day.
Judging from their website, One Nation has been doing your homework for you. I'm wondering, have you been getting their emails like many others have?
No, this is a very interesting thing. No, I don't. I know Ian. I was talking to him outside, but I don't get their emails. I'm not on their mailing list. But, sometimes I get a sense that now, I do get a bit worried, Tony, that now we're going to sort of launch ourselves into trying to create a pariah out of One Nation. That, we can't persecute these people, as you certainly shouldn't. So we are going to persecute these ones instead, and I think that's wrong.
Who's persecuting them?
Well, this idea that any person who even says hello to somebody from one nation is somehow a form of pariah, and I think that's wrong.
Ian Nelson, do you feel like a pariah?
No, certainly not.
Well, okay, let's move on then. I presume that you back Scott Morrison's, going back to the original question, I presume you back Scott Morrison's original stand on the funerals.
Well, yes. We have always said that you've got to start counting your dollars, very simply. Look, God forbid, this is tragic, but God forbid, if something happened to your family member, and one of our family members, I don't think we'd put it on the government to get the whole family to travel to wherever the funeral is and then pay for the funeral. And then
unless they were perhaps imprisoned in detention.
Well, that's a valid point, but I'll repeat this one more time. If the Labor Party, the Labor government had stuck to the Pacific solution, that boat would never have been there and those tragic people would never have been dead.
Were you surprised, just briefly, were you surprised to hear Scott Morrison so clearly echoing the views that you put out on this subject on your website?
Not at all. I mean, we're Conservatives, the same as the Liberal National Party are. I mean, we at the moment, we're blogging daily because we need to be more relevant, and we're finding that the Liberal National Party are, you know, people with the same like-minded views.
And picking up your views and running them as policy?
You said that, not me.
It's a question.
Well, they might, but and we're happy about that. The same as when political parties use our policies. We're happy about that. We're not here to govern Australia. We're here to keep politics honest.
Okay, let's go to our second question of the night, because it does, and we'll bring in the other panellists after that, but it's on the same subject, and it comes from John McNaughton.
What action can the average Australian or Queenslander do to stop the drift towards multiculturalism? The boat people seem to be having more rights in Australia than do people who are born here.
Gina, can I get you to comment on that? I'm going to bring in the rest of the panel on this, but that's a view that's out there. What do you say?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say my father was a boat person. And actually, my people have been... My people have been dealing with boat people for over 400 years now.
Ian Nelson, I'll pick you up on that question.
Well, I think what the gentleman meant was we have legislation in force in Australia that basically looks after ethnics very, very well, and we could be discriminated against at any time. Precisely. We can be discriminated at any time if we seem to have offended someone. And you know what? We don't agree with that. Our women, why do they have to cover themselves up on a certain day to go swimming?
I don't actually. What your women? When you say your women, who do you mean?
Australians.
Yeah.
Australian.
So they should swim naked?
Well, no. Well, that'd be nice, but no, not at all, Tony. What I'm saying is now we have a call by the Muslims to insist that our women be properly covered, appropriately covered when they go swimming. Wearing a burqa? I don't get it.
Anna Bligh, I've got to bring you in here. I mean, have you heard the call for all women to wear burqas on the beach? I haven't heard that one.
I haven't heard it, but I'm not in the naked swimming camp either. So.
Where do you sit on this question? It's a serious question.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting question. It implies that there is some drift towards multiculturalism. I turned 50 last year, so I've been around in Australia for a little while, and you know, the Australia I grew up in had people from all different nations in my neighbourhood, and throughout the 1970s, as I was becoming a young adult, many people arrived from Vietnam, and I don't recall it being so difficult to accept. And then we had waves of people from China, for example, after Tiananmen Square. I don't see a drift happening now that wasn't happening in the 1980s, in the 1970s, in the 1960s. I see the modern Australia that I'm part of, looks, you know, it looks as multicultural to me as it did. There's more people, but the mix, I'm sure some of them are coming from different countries, but, you know, I love it. I love the fact that look at these people here.
Okay, just quickly on this, the other part of what the gentleman said, boat people seem to have more rights in Australia than people who were born here. Are you disturbed that kind of idea has taken root?
Look, I think it's very unfortunate that people would think that. Australians enjoy, I think, some of the best human rights in the world, and we're very lucky. We have, an unfettered right to practice our own religion, to vote, to get health care, to, wherever you look. When you look around the world, it's pretty hard to think of a place that you'd rather be than being Australian when it comes to exercising rights. And if I was living in a detention centre, I don't think I'd think that I was somehow better off than your average Australian.
Let me just go to Tim Flannery on this. I know you're here to talk about global warming primarily, but this issue is raising temperatures, no question about that.
Look, I think people just fail to see that this has been a multicultural country from the very start. The first fleet had Greek pirates among it. It had black people from the West Indies. The very first festival celebrated in this country on any scale was the Festival of Ali in 1806 in Sydney, a Muslim festival. So we have been multicultural from the very beginning. We're going to continue that way. It is just in the fabric of this country.
Barnaby Joyce.
Tony, I think you set the gentleman up a bit. I think that in a way you got a question and made the most out of it, and good luck to you. But I think that most people...
Sorry, do you think it's not legitimate for him to ask that question? Because I'm intrigued.
I think
about
it
that
then turned into putting a person in a place where quite obviously they're going to get chopped to pieces, and I think that was the game. But
well, perhaps you could just answer the question.
Well, obviously that we're all ethnic at one stage, weren't we? I mean, every person who's in this nation at some stage, except for Gina's mother or father, came from somewhere else, and so we have to respect that. The first forebears of mine came here because their parents starved to death in a hedge. In my family, there are approximately 10 languages spoken at if we all turn up for Christmas dinner. So I've got no problems living in a society with many cultures, but I always want people to make sure that first and foremost, as Sir James Gobbo said when he was initially bringing up this issue, that we focus on making Australia a great place, and we talk about the things that the Premier talked about, the equality of the sexes, the equality of religions, a free and fair go, and that supplants and stands in front of any other associations we might have after that.
And just briefly on the other part of that question, boat people seem to have more rights in Australia than people who were born here. Is that something you agree with?
No, I don't. I think that when you arrive in a new country, it's tough going, and it's a hard road to hoe, because you have to try and make your way in an area where probably your language that's spoken is not your first language. I don't believe that it is a ticket to Vanity Fair to arrive here as a refugee.
Okay, we've got another question on a similar subject. It comes from YEHYA El Kholed.
My question is to all parties. How do they expect Muslims to integrate and be proud of being Australians when our politicians are debating how many Muslims can immigrate to Australia and what they should wear and how they should socialise?
Okay, let's hear from, first of all, Anna Bligh on that. Did you hear the question correctly?
I did, and I think any Australian government is always going to want to have a debate about how many people can be brought into the country in any particular year. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad discussion about how many people we want, how big we want Australia to be, and how many we can accommodate in any one particular year or 2 year period. But I think we have to be very careful in having that discussion to make sure that it is about how many can we accommodate rather than what kind of people, if you like. But I think it's also very important that, and taking Barnaby's point, but that we understand that when people come to this country from other cultures, from other religions, from other languages, that we are tolerant of that and we put in place some assistance to help people, become part of Australian community in a meaningful way. That's not easy, but I think if you look at how Australia's managed it overall, I think we have to be actually proud of the success. It's not without its problems. It's not without these kind of debates. It's not, it's not a bed of roses all the time. But when I look at other countries who are trying to deal with these things, I'm very proud of the way Australia does it. I think it's not easy to be a refugee. It's not easy to be a newcomer to this country. But I think that overall, when I look around me, we celebrate most of the time the multicultural community that is Australia.
Let's hear from Ian Nelson on this. And just to reiterate the question, it essentially was, how do you expect Muslims to integrate and be proud of being Australians when you're essentially saying they shouldn't be here?
I don't think anybody's saying they shouldn't be here. What we are saying is that we would love them to assimilate. We seem to find through evidence that they don't. Muslims have their own religion and they have their own mosques, they have their own Sharia law, they have their own Bible, the Quran, which is really different than what we do. I don't know what's funny about that. I mean, it's a serious problem. They don't. It's not that we don't like their religion. They don't like our religion. Is it true? Is it not? No, wait a minute. Is it true that they're offended by the scene of naivety during Christmas time? I mean, is that true? Is that true? The Mayor of Sydney doesn't allow anybody to display it. That's our Christianity. Exactly. I mean, you folks you just don't
Christianity.
Look,
you have a problem with
We'll get a microphone to you. Just hang on a sec.
I've lived and
just hang on for a
Muslims.
second. We're just going to hear from our questioner.
We don't have a problem with Christianity. We don't have a problem with anyone in Australia. These people, I'll take a bullet for these people. But I do have a problem that it's always Islam, Muslim, Islam, Muslim. Do you think it's easy? My wife gets spat out in the streets. All these, like, millions of things happens. If it wasn't for the people that I've known throughout my life, I would have told my wife these people are bad. But obviously they're not, because there's so much more people out here that respect my wife and respect me, but it really, you make life hard for all Muslims, the way you act and the way you just always Islam, Muslim. We don't hate your religion. We believe Jesus is our prophet. We love Jesus. We love, I don't know where you get all these ideologies from.
Well, a couple of years ago, the President and myself went and visited a mosque on the Gold Coast, and we found those imams to be absolutely charming. And the people there were also charming, very charming. These people, the Muslims there, they've seemed to have assimilated, and they're practising a diversified culture. They're not multicultural. They're practising a diversified culture, and they mix with other religions too. These folks are wonderful. We welcome them. It's the scary speeches your imams give in the Sydney mosque that scare the living daylights out of all of us. It's the burqa, which is an intimidating thing to see at the best of times. We understand it's your religion, but you've got to understand that we have a religion too, and we want to be free to practice that.
Can I go to Barnaby Joyce on this? Barnaby Joyce, are you and some of your colleagues playing with the fears of Muslims that exist in some parts of the community?
No, I'm not, Tony, but I get a sense that we're starting to do that here tonight,
yeah, we're doing
which I don't like at all. I believe that it's a ridiculous question, should we have more of one group, or because as soon as you say we're going to have more of one group, it means you must have less of another. I think it's the greatest gift you have is to come into this nation, and it should be given to those who want to participate in this nation in a way that shows some sort of unified purpose, whatever that is. I don't think it's determined by religion or creed or colour or anything else, but it's your desire when you turn up here to pick up the papers and not walk past them, to be a member of the Defence Force, a member of the Police Force, to participate in a civic way. It's a very easy argument, Tony, to turn this into some sort of... This is dog whistle. I'm watching it. This is dog whistle stuff on two directions.
You would have seen the reports.
Well,
you would have seen the reports last week suggesting that Scott Morrison raised the potency of this issue in shadow cabinet.
Well, the first thing, without disclosing, that's wrong. I mean, that was a report that was wrong. And so, let's start from chores. And once more, it incites on both directions. If you put out something that is false, it is just as insightful as putting out something that is correct that you shouldn't have said. So we have to be extremely careful of how we do this. We have a peaceful nation. We want to try and keep it that way, and we do it by not antagonising from either direction, Tony.
Yeah. get Gina Castellan's view on this.
Well, I just want to say, when everybody cuts themselves, we all bleed red. We're all people. We should all respect one another. We should all respect each other's beliefs, each other's cultures, all be free to practice whatever rituals we want to practice. I think I'm proud to be an Australian, and I'm proud that we're a multicultural country. And that's just the way it should be.
OK, we've got a few people with their hands up in the air. We'll try and get microphones over to you, over in the centre there. And in the meantime, we'll take a question from Andrea Nelligan.
Does the panel think that allowing people into Australia who came from misogynist and undemocratic cultures where church and the state are intermingled is a good idea for Australia's future?
Tim Flannery, do you want to pick up that point?
Sure. Look, I think we are all Australians equal under the law, and it is a disgrace, just to refer to that previous question, for politicians to discriminate among Australians. People who cross over and break the law, sure, wherever they come from, they should feel the full weight of the law. But we do have a multicultural society here. The Muslim religion and people who adhere to that religion have played a very, very proud part in the building of our nation, from the Afghan camel years onwards, and I just don't think we can afford any discrimination. Sure, we may not all agree about social mores and so forth, but I remember when I was a kid going to a Catholic church with the women had to wear something over their head. We took Lent equally as seriously as Muslims take Ramadan. People and cultures change over time, and I think that we will build a more common understanding as we go on.
Anna Bligh, the question was, does the panel think allowing people into Australia who come from misogynist and undemocratic cultures where church and state are intermingled is a good idea?
Well, I think many people who leave those countries leave them because they're looking for something different and something better, and that's what Australia offers them. And I don't think there's nothing, as Tim said, there's nothing new about that now. People have been seeking to come to democratic countries that provide opportunity, like Australia, like the United States, like the United Kingdom, for centuries. People, if people are oppressed and kept down for long enough, they will seek something better for themselves and their families. So it's often the very things that you're talking about that drive people. I mean, I can't imagine going and becoming a citizen of another country. I think it must be very hard, and that people are often driven because they're looking for something different and better for themselves and their children. So I think we do need to understand that some of the people who come here and seek to become Australians are coming from countries that do not have the same system of government or the same culture. And that's actually one of the reasons why people want to come here, because they're looking for that. But it's equally true that culture, when we say multicultural, that culture is not just about eating different food and speaking a different language. It does come down to your faith, your religion, your social beliefs. And, it's not only people from different countries that have different views. I've got, sixth generation Australians, in my family who hold different views than me, and we have good political arguments about it, and that's okay.
OK, we've got a few people with their hands up in the audience. I'll go to this gentleman down the front here. Well, we're going to change topics shortly, but just let's hear what a few people in the audience have to say.
Just considering the way that the audience has been responding to what's been said, do you think, and this is specifically for the One Nation member, do you think maybe that this is a bit more of an old school thought of, oh, they must be different, whereas the community here at least seems to be saying, look, generally, peace to all men, freedom of expression to all men and women, thank you, Barnaby, but generally that those are the major fundamentals of each of these religions, not just Muslim, but all of them, and that needs to be something that's promoted?
I'm going to take that as a comment. We'll come back to you. There's a gentleman with his hand up just behind you there. We're just getting a microphone to you. 1 second. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my question, I tried to say it a little bit earlier, but it was about mandatory detention. And we've had it since 1993. Has any government really done a cost-benefit analysis on it? And, what purpose does it serve? We're one of the few countries in the world that has mandatory detention.
OK, all right. That is a little bit off the topic we were talking about. I'm going to take that as a comment again. And we had a questioner down the front here. We'll just try and get a microphone over to you quickly, sir. Yes, just right down the front here. Okay, we're getting a microphone to you. Hang on.
The media. Do you think the media have a lot to answer for regarding this gentleman up here in the lovely blue shirt, that we excel this, we get on there and we just take the mickey out of it, and we see people in the western suburbs and it's always Middle Eastern, it's always to this race, and I don't know, do you think the media has something to do with it as well?
Look, we'll throw that to Anna Bly.
Sounds like a question to Tony Jones.
It is a question for you. If you want to blame the media, that's fine with me.
We'll take that as a comment.
All right. I think we have heard a range of views on this topic. It is time to move along. Go to something else. You're watching Q&A, where you ask the questions. The next question comes from Miso Stoikovsky.
Premier Bly, the recent polls have deservedly approved of your handling of the flood disaster. However, many questions remain about the government's preparations and planning to avoid the disaster from ever occurring in the first place. Will you guarantee that you will wait until after the final flood report to call the elections so that people can make a fully informed decision at the polling booth?
Thank you. It's true that we've been through an extraordinary time, and some of the disasters, I think, some of the flooding are pretty easily explained, and in other parts there are some very legitimate questions, particularly in relation to the two specific questions I've put to the Commission of Inquiry. One, the early warning systems and forecasting in relation to the terrible events in the Toowoomba and Lockyer Valley, and two, the operation of the YEHYA Dam, and whether, firstly, was it operated as it was required to be, and two, are the requirements, were they appropriate for the event as it occurred? I'm not in a position to judge that, and we've put in place a panel that I think everybody on all sides of politics accepts is a genuinely independent, capable and expert group of commissioners with all the powers of a Royal Commission of Inquiry. I've asked them to do two things. One, give the public an interim report in August if there are any issues which they believe we need to know in time for the next wet season. And secondly, to give a report in the end of, I think, 17th of January, which is 12 months from when we set them up, because that, again, 12 months is the amount of time I think you want for a Royal Commission. The next election is not due until March 2012, and I've said numerous times in the last week, because I've had a cabinet reshuffle, everyone's got very excited about an election. Can I tell you, the cabinet reshuffle is about the task we've got ahead of us. We've got a massive reconstruction task. It's without precedent in our country, and frankly, I think that if I did anything other than rebuild Queensland this year, I'd be doing the wrong thing by Queensland.
So, is that a promise that you won't have an early election?
That's right.
That's right?
That's right.
Okay. Barnaby Joyce?
I agree with the Premier that really obviously I think the Premier did a good job during the floods, and to say anything else would be not correct. But the decision the people of Queensland will make is what happens after the floods and how you deal with that, how you manage it, getting it back on the road, so to speak. We have already people in Rockhampton, the Mayor of Rockhampton, who's starting to say, look, the promises that were made are not being delivered. We've got the Mayor of Brisbane saying the promises that were made are not being delivered. And now we're going to start seeing this political football passed around as to who's actually responsible for fixing things. Empathy is extremely important and has been delivered in spades. And now it's the part where you actually have to deliver an outcome. And if you don't deliver the outcome, you won't be the government.
Okay, I'll move quickly to our next question. Got quite a few questions on the whole issue, or all the issues surrounding the flooding and the disasters in Queensland. Our next question comes from Samuel Glenn.
My question is for the Premier. Why do we need a flood levy introduced? Do you know how much is needed to bring Queensland back to full function without needing to burn holes in our pockets?
Thank you. These disasters are without precedent in Australia's history. We've had floods before, we've had cyclones, but we've never had in any state of Australia all of them at once over such a large area in such catastrophic proportions. The disaster arrangements in Australia that have prevailed under all sides of politics for more than a decade, I think a couple of decades now, a set of arrangements by which the Commonwealth Government pays 75% of the cost of restoring essential public infrastructure. Not just state infrastructure, but much of what gets damaged in these things are the infrastructure of local councils. And what we've got is a great example of it here in Queensland. Many of the councils worst affected are some of the smallest councils in Australia. So the roads that they have are really important to everyone, but they've actually got a very small group of ratepayers and a very small ability to cope with fixing it. And the state government pays 25%. So we've got the money to pay our 25%, but it will really stretch our budget. The Commonwealth are saying in order for us to fix something of this scale, not only in Queensland, but they've got this massive event in Queensland, as well as what happened in Victoria and to some extent Western Australia. They're saying in these circumstances, we need Australians to pitch in and help in a way that Australians have done before. We did it for the milk industry, we've done it for the sugar industry, we've did it for the gun buyback when John Howard made those reforms. There are just some times when things happen that are so extreme and so beyond the planning of any government that it's important that you add to that by some one-off supplement, which is what the federal government's asking for.
Let's hear Barnaby Joyce on this subject as well, because you're against the levy.
Yeah. First of all, we had tens of billions of dollars put away for a rainy day. It's just that Mr Rudd spent it in the first 10 months. That's where your money went. And now we're well, it's true. Now you're $182 billion in gross debt. And the week they announced the levy, you borrowed, because you're going to pay it back, you borrowed $4 billion that week. So this levy would have covered you for 3 days of that. So you've got to start getting things into perspective about exactly where we're off to here. Now, what we've said is there are other things that we can put off. We don't have to be buying back the water to put back in the river when the river's flooded right now. That can actually wait a little while. We can actually start putting off some of these other costs so that we can really fundamentally get the books back in shape. Otherwise, we're just tinkering at the edges. And you've got to remember, this levy is not to fix houses. It's not to fix personal things. It's to fix the government's problem. And the other thing you've got to remember is the difference between Queensland and the other states is the other states are insured. Queensland's not, for some reason that I'm sure the Premier will explain.
I might just, I will just hold on for a second, Barnaby, just because we just had a tweet come in. Someone's watching this debate. A tweet has come in and it says, "So Bligh, why does Queensland not have insurance for disasters like the other states?"
It's a very good question. I'm very pleased to have a chance to answer it. For exactly the same reason that under John Howard, the Commonwealth Government decided not to be insured either, and that is because it is not cost effective in a state as big as Queensland. We went out to the market about 7 years ago. The cost of well, first of all, they won't insure us for roads. They don't insure New South Wales for roads. They don't insure other states. You can't get insured for roads. More than 80% of the cost of this disaster is roads. So when we went out to the market and said, we are a big state that has a lot of disasters and we want insurance, the cost of getting the insurance was actually more than it was for us to effectively self-insure. So we do exactly the same as the Commonwealth decided to do under the Howard government, which is also not insured. What it does is self-insure because it's more cost-effective for taxpayers. So, well, it is true, Barnaby.
Well, no, but what happens when you self-insure is you put aside a provision.
And that's what we've done.
So, Premier, did you put aside money to actually cover for this in the future?
Yes, we did.
Well, where did it go?
We put aside money. Happy to answer. We put aside money in every budget for disasters because we are so regularly affected by them.
OK, well, how about the last budget?
And
how much you put aside
We put aside just under $700 million. And this disaster will cost us more than that because we did not forecast something of this magnitude. But nevertheless, we will be in a position to pay our share, Queensland's share, under the disaster arrangements that have prevailed under both sides of politics for many years. But, you know, put all of that aside, I guess what I would say to every federal politician, if you don't think this levy is worth it, come to my state. Come and have a look at the people in Tully Heads. Come and have a look at the people in Chinchilla and Dalby out in Barnaby's area. Come and have a look in the suburbs of Brisbane. And what you'll find are people, just ordinary Australians, who need help. And they expect other Australians to say, we're here for you.
Barnaby Joyce, I've just got to Can I just intercede here, because a point was made earlier and it's a relevant one. I mean, you're not actually against levies, are you? The previous government, the Howard government, introduced, was it half a dozen levies, including for the gun buyback, for milk deregulation, to pay off Ansett employees. So why not for Queensland?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the levy for something that's foreseeable is different to a levy for something that's not, like the gun buyback. People are already donating out of their own pockets. In fact, donating far more.
You made it happen.
Donating far more out of their own pockets than you're actually asking for them. Now you're compulsorily asking them to put their hand in. You're actually walking over the top of the compassion that was in place, that we've actually put on the table the capacity to find the money from elsewhere. And that when you talk about Tully Heads, there's always this inference that we're going out there to fix the houses. We're not. We're going out to fix the government's roads that they failed to fix themselves.
Well, hang on. That's important. No, I think it's really important here. The council that oversees Tully is a great little council. I think it's probably one of the smallest councils in Australia. And most of the roads in that area are council roads. And they need state help, and I'm happy to give it, and they need federal government help.
And we're happy to give it, but we're not happy to give it out of their pockets. We can put aside money from other areas and give them that.
OK, hang on a sec. Ian Nelson, I'll just bring Ian Nelson in here, because you had the essentially the same position as the coalition. In fact, the Australian newspaper last week reported the coalition policy was one hatched in One Nation heartland. That's the policy on the flood levy. What do you say to that?
Well, Tony, we've had a policy in place now since 1998 to have a national disaster fund. We've had that in place since 1998. We saw that as an imperative. Nobody listened. Now I guess we're looking at disaster after disaster, and we're out of money. We haven't got any money. So how do we do this? OK, there's one simple, fine way to do it. Our foreign aid is shot over $4.4 billion. You've got to hear me out here. $4.4 billion. We need $2.2 billion to get us up and going. 2.2, just for 2 or 3 years. What on earth is wrong with that? We've got Queenslanders living in tents at the moment, and I can't help but think that my heart goes out to them.
OK, Barnaby Joyce, is that an appealing notion to you? Because it did seem to be to some of your coalition colleagues.
We don't believe in cutting aid. We believe that there might be an instance to defer the aid to such a period of time, which is like 2 years, till such a period of time as we have looked after our priority first. We've got to look after the people in our own state and our own nation first. And I think other nations would understand that completely if they were in our position. OK, we're going to move on again to a slightly different topic, but still related to this. Tom Fadoulis has a question.
My question goes to all the panellists. Many prominent figures in the media and political circles have been quick to link Queensland's summer of extreme weather to human-induced climate change. Is it naive to make the connection between CO2 emissions and extreme weather? Or are we really to blame for our state's worst natural disaster in living memory?
Tim Flannery, your job will be to explain this to people. Let's start now.
Thank you, Dan. Look, could I just start with the observation that for the last quarter of last year, the last 3 months of last year, we saw sea surface temperatures across northern Australia and Western Australia that broke all records. And warm water, of course, evaporates and creates rainfall much more readily than cool water. Not surprisingly, we saw rainfall across eastern Australia that broke all records. It's telling us we're outside the historic envelope of occurrences. At the same time, in the southwest of Australia, we saw a drought that broke all records, and that is ongoing. So there's evidence that we are moving outside the historic envelope of events that we knew previously. Now, individual weather events like floods, it's very, very hard to link them to a changing climate because they are weather events. But climate science, just in the last few months, has made some significant breakthroughs in that area, and 2 major scientific studies have emerged that link floods particularly with the changing climate. One of them links increased CO2 in the atmosphere with the increased level of flooding across the northern hemisphere over the last decade or 2. The other one links a specific flood event, particularly the flood in Wales, with increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we are now getting to the point where we can actually do that. We can link individual weather events to the greenhouse gases. For the southern hemisphere, we're not there yet. And I've asked the scientists that advise the Climate Commission to give us a reading on where we are in terms of linking things in the Southern Hemisphere. But the basic physics is the same. There's no reason to assume it'll be different down here. So we are slowly building those links towards particularly floods, flood events, and climate change.
Ross Garnaut was heavily criticised in some quarters for daring to link the floods and cyclones in Queensland to climate change. Are you wary of doing that?
Look, I think we need to take the science as it is. And the science is probabilistic, right? So people are talking about 90% plus probabilities of these links. It's important to recognise that. It's also important to recognise that in the Southern Hemisphere we don't have the same wealth of data that let us do the statistical analyses we need to get that degree of certainty as yet. May come eventually, but we don't quite have it yet. So we need to talk about probabilities and we need to recognise the science where it is. But it is leaning towards, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, a link, establishing a link between flooding and climate change.
Let's hear from Gina. How does this look from Cape York, this story?
Well, with climate change, I think there is a weight of evidence out there that appears to fairly and solidly be behind the reality of climate change. In Cape York, we're already, traditional owners who are working out on country on cultural and natural resource management projects are already noticing changes on the ground, rising sea levels. Plants are starting to flower before they're actually supposed to flower. There's a wealth of traditional ecological knowledge there amongst, traditional owners all over northern Australia. And we have a Waterways and Wetlands and Coastal Advisory Committee. We work closely with scientists such as Tim, and I think we really need to take this seriously. And I think that we all have a role to play. I think that government has a role to play, industry has a role to play, individuals have a role to play in minimising the effects of climate change.
Barnaby Joyce, what's your role in this?
My role's to the other side of the argument, isn't it? But look...
to be the other side of the argument?
Yeah, well, obviously.
Well, what is the other side of the argument?
Well, the other side of the argument is you've got to match predictions up with what people have said. Now, I've heard Mr. Flannery before say that Brisbane was going to run out of water. We certainly didn't. That didn't happen. Look, you have people saying, well, the model that predicts where Cyclone Yassi went is exactly the same model as they used to predict climate change. Well, models have been around predicting the direction of cyclones have been around for years and being improved over years. And if this model is so good, then let's run it backwards and see if we can predict what happened to the climate last year. Every person who has a barrow to push, you must understand if people are getting paid to investigate something, they will keep on investigating it because by investigating it, they keep on getting paid. And, so I do come to this with a sense of scepticism, and I always like to hear both sides of the argument. I like to hear proficient scientists who have different views, and they're out there. And I know that you don't agree with them, Tony, but I'll keep my mind open to the debate, and I won't be locked into sort of a categorical belief one way or the other.
Yes, you actually have introduced to public meetings in your own electorate climate sceptics.
That's correct.
Some of whom are scientists, indeed.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, would you now be prepared to bring Tim Flannery into your electorate? Because his job is now to explain the opposite argument.
I would love to bring Tim Flannery in, but just before I start, Tim, are you actually a climatologist?
A climatologist?
Yeah. Well, what do you have your PhD in?
My PhD is in paleontology.
Paleontology.
So, right, with an interest in past climates and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The group that I work with now has Australia's best climate scientists on it.
But I mean,
we're working together to bring some clarity to this thing.
I would happily bring Tim in if I want to have a discussion about paleontology.
Can I just say, Barnaby, I think you've taken a few pretty cheap shots there. I really do. I think that, scientists are the greatest sceptics out there. The second you find someone who's absolutely certain about something, as some of the climate sceptics are, you're not dealing with a scientist who's serious about the issue.
Because I see what happened to people like Clive Spash at the CSIRO and how he was bundled out because he dared to differ. He dared to stand up and say, I disagree. I see what's happened to other people who have basically been ridiculed and persecuted. So I think it's only fair that at times I stand up for the other side.
Let me hear from... sorry, go ahead. You can respond to that.
I know nothing about those particular cases that you've made, right? But
you don't know about Clive Spash from the CSI.
No, I don't know
right?
about his bundling.
You don't
out
know about
But can I just say the point that we need to make, right, is that why don't we listen to the mainstream science? Why don't we actually take it on board with all of the issues about probabilities and so forth, and deal with this as an insurance issue or an issue of probabilities rather than I just don't believe it.
Well,
that doesn't cut anymore.
We can have an insurance issue on malaria and a whole range of issues. I mean, that is an argument that you could put into any semblance of a problem. Let's use the insurance argument.
Okay, I'm going to just interrupt this Socratic dialogue for a moment to hear from Anna Bligh. Do you believe that Ross Garner was right to directly link the extreme weather events to the situation in Queensland and say essentially that Queenslanders in particular should support action against climate change?
Look, I've always said that Queensland has a particular interest in the climate change debate. One, because we are a large state with extreme weather. We always have been. What I'm concerned about when I look at what's happening, we've had a Category 5 cyclone before. It was in 1918, and we had 2 of them, I think, in 2 months, and then nothing like that for 100 years. We've had massive floods before, 1974 here in Brisbane. But these were events that are, like 1974 flood, I think people thought that was going to be the biggest flood you'd ever see in your lifetime. Well, we've now had 2 in a lifetime, and I plan to be around for a while, and I have to plan for the prospect there might be another one. It's not so much that I think there's a direct cause that necessarily the climate caused that flood, but that these events are at risk of becoming more regular and more frequent. That I think so. It's not necessarily that this bit of burning coal caused that flood. I don't think you'll ever get that, but something that indicates to me that weather patterns are changing. That the world is, the temperatures are getting hotter, that water temperatures are getting higher on a more regular basis. I don't think we can ignore that. And I guess I go to Barnaby's point. I mean, Barnaby, I'm in the same situation as you. I'm not highly trained as a scientist. I do believe, I believe in listening to the scientists, and they sometimes disagree with each other. But I guess I think, and scientists have been known to be wrong on some important things. I understand that. But I think in this case, if they're right and we make all the plans and change some of the things we're doing, and then we're in a good position. Right. If they're wrong and we've changed some of those things, what harm have we done?
Okay,
why would we take that risk?
We've got a few people with their hands up, so we'll just get a microphone to, first of all, the young lady in the black there. We'll get a microphone to you.
Does the panel agree with Bob Brown's assertion that the mining companies should have to foot the bill for the floods, despite the fact that many of those companies, such as BHP and Rio, have already donated quite generously?
Well, yeah, let's hear from our One Nation colleague on that.
I didn't quite hear all that question.
Bob Brown has suggested that the mining companies, being partially responsible, in his view, for the floods due to the climate change effect,
he was a bit stronger
should be paying.
It was a bit stronger than partially responsible. He said that the coal barons, caused the flood.
Yeah, and
well, let's get your response to it.
You're going to get a lot of Bob Brown in July the 1st this year, and I can assure you that that's a very dangerous position to be in. Everybody's saying how wonderful it is that the mainstream scientists have proven this. Well, what about the other guys that didn't agree with it? Never got on TV. Banned from television studios, didn't have a say. As I understand it, CO2 is the enemy. Is that right? Carbon tax? Is CO2 the enemy?
Too much is not good for the planet.
Too much is not good for the planet. OK, that's ridiculous. How can there be not too much CO2 in there? I mean, 338 parts per million of trace elements in the atmosphere right now. How can that be too much? It's never going to reach that position where it's going to be a critical mass. What I've got to say to you is that this is going to change the lifestyle of every one of us, simply and solely because it's going to cost you a lot more money. If you think this carbon tax is something that you could laugh off, the GST is just a baby compared to this baby.
OK, all right, we've got a few other people with their hands up. Let's go to this gentleman right down the front here. We'll get a microphone to you.
Why is nuclear power not on the table from any politician at the moment?
I'll ask the ALP president that, because that debate will be coming up in your conference, I believe. Why is the nuclear power not part of this debate, since it's clean energy, theoretically?
Theoretically. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons that certainly I can only talk about the Labor Party. Other people can talk about other groups, but I think there is a genuine view held by a number of people in the Labor Party that there are still a range of safety and other issues associated with nuclear power. Now, there are many countries around the world that take a majority of their power from this source, and it's a different... I guess the world's changing, and the technology may well give more people who have been worried about it in the past some more comfort. But it's equally true that you've got to, when you look at a source of power, you also have to look at its feasibility and its cost, etc. It was in fact John Howard who had the most recent thorough look at the applicability of this source of power in Australia. He had Ziggy Swatowski do the report for him, and his assessment really was that at this point, with our population and our electricity distribution network, it would be an incredibly expensive source of power that no one would make money out of, so that no private sector wouldn't build it and Australians wouldn't want to pay the price of the power. Now, that doesn't mean that won't change over time. That's the most recent assessment of it.
Okay, just before I go to you, Barnaby, I'd just like to hear from Tim Flannery. Nuclear power, good or bad idea for Australia?
Look, I think that in Australia we have such an abundance of renewable sources of energy. We've got great wind provinces, potentially very good geothermal, and fantastic solar. That nuclear is always going to be economically disadvantaged. Now, as the Premier said, that may change, I guess, in time. But at the moment, you look at the money going into wind and photovoltaics is very substantial. We haven't yet seen that sort of push with nuclear.
The Mojave Desert.
Barnaby Joyce,
I think
just very briefly, because we've got a
Okay, I think the thing is, everyone believes that this is some sort of esoteric debate, but unfortunately for people who can't afford their power, it's not. And what's happening is policies now are forcing up the price of power so that people who can least afford it can't run their air conditioner, can't run their heater, are going without because of our desire to try and create, green power. It is costing people, and we just can't do it. It's something wrong that the people in Singapore deliver cheaper power to their people, 30% cheaper to their people with our coal than what we can deliver to our people with our coal.
You quickly respond to that. I'm sorry.
Well, I would just say, as someone who has to provide power to one of the biggest parts of the country, it's much cheaper to provide power in Singapore that's that big, rather than having to provide it to the Northern Territory or to the Cape York. That's the cost.
As you know, Premier, they actually have to move the coal 6,300 kilometres before it gets to the power station. That is kind of a bit of a journey, as opposed to the power station, which is actually in the coalfield.
It's not, as well as I do, it's the distribution network that costs the money. It's pumping it out there to people's homes.
So we're incapable of delivering cheap power.
But was this an argument for nuclear power?
Well, I think that if you're going to have a choice between total renewables and nuclear, then you better start having a look at nuclear.
So why didn't you do it when you were in government?
Because we had coal. We were delivering coal. We're delivering cheap coal. Since the Labor Party has been in there, the price of utilities has been going up 10% a year, and that's by reason of your bad management.
Okay, you're watching Q&A live from the Brisbane Powerhouse on a stormy night in southeast Queensland. A bit stormy in here from time to time. And our next question comes from Peter Black.
There are many reasons to be critical of our political leaders of late, and we've discussed some of those tonight. Immigration, asylum seekers, climate change, and the unexpected return of one nation to the national agenda. But is the reason why our media and our politicians continue to seem to be in a race to the bottom because it's simply good politics? And so my question is, are we getting the bad government and leaders we deserve?
Gina Castellane, let's start with you on that. Are we getting the bad leaders and the bad government we deserve?
Well, just feel free. So whatever you like.
There are good leaders, there are bad leaders, I think we have very good leadership at the moment. Go the females.
Do you mean generally the female leaders, plural, or just the one that's sitting next to me?
No, we need more time to think about that question.
Don't you worry about it. Let's go to Barnaby Joyce to hear this. Are we getting the leadership we deserve?
Well, you get the leadership you vote for, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's... one of the problems we've got in the last election is actually we got the leaders we didn't vote for, we got the leaders the independents gave us, and which is a bit disappointing, I suppose, for me, but not for if you're in the Labor Party. I think you've got to be really careful not to ridicule politics or to continue to run it down. If you do, you just create a sense that I don't want to go into that field. We want to make sure that we attract the best and the brightest, and the people who love our nation want to take it ahead. And if you keep on making a joke of it, well, you'll suffer, because you'll end up with the people here that you really did create.
Ian Nelson.
Well, yeah, we have got some pretty poor leaders at the moment, and I have to say that in sincerity, Australia's policies are, there's a different dynamics in Australia right now. I, for one, don't understand why, for 1 minute, that we were vilified from 1998. Sure, we were 10 years ahead of our time. Our policies are now... Now, how many of you have read the One Nation website policies? I ask you, how many have you read that? We have had policies in there since 1998. We've had population policies. We've had water policies, infrastructure policies. We have a disaster fund policies. And you people think that's really funny, do you? Well, I've got to say to you, what you need to do is do a little bit more reading. Go into www.onenationqueensland.com.au and have a look. We're only too pleased to show that our policies have been there since 1998.
OK. Well, I know that's a unique pitch to the voters. You're all stupid.
We don't get many chances, Tony.
Gina.
I would like to say one thing. I mean, the strongest leadership skills I've seen in a long time actually came from our Premier, just over the last couple of weeks. I was absolutely amazed, during Cyclone Yassi. I was absolutely amazed at the government's response. I was getting text messages, regularly, every hour or 2 hours, about evacuation, about the power going off, about, we were being kept well informed. I think I'd just like to say thank you, Premier, for such a wonderful job during, that crisis.
Anna Bligh, well, I guess the real question is, if you've bucked the trend, I mean, you're one of the few political leaders in this country that's actually now getting good ratings. Although that is rather recent, I have to admit. What's your secret?
Well, I'm actually going to go back to that gentleman's question and try to answer it seriously.
Yes, good.
I think it is important to remember that while it's often the extremes of politics and the extreme views on the left and the right, and in religious terms and others, that occupy some of the public space because they're the more colourful, and we're drawn to, one way or another, people either sort of get attracted to them or repelled by them. That often occupies a lot of the public space. But in my experience, if I look over, what Australia's done over, decades, by and large, it's my experience in Australia that the mob pretty well gets it right at elections. I don't always agree with it. It does no pleasure in losing, but, but, if you actually look at how Australia manages its democracy, I think we've done a pretty good job if you look at how we've done it since Federation. And, we've pretty much elected government. Some have been better than others on both sides of politics, but we've elected people that have actually made us a pretty good place. And, I think that's a reflection of the strength of Australia's democracy, and that people, by and large, take their vote seriously and do the best with it.
OK, the charm offensive continues. But that's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panellists, Barnaby Joyce, Ian Nelson, Gina Castellane, Anna Bligh and Tim Flannery. OK, next Monday on Q&A, we'll be joined by Assistant Treasurer Bill Shorten, Shadow Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull, UN Youth Representative Summer Hadid, political commentator Piers Ackerman, author, comedian and former Big Brother host Gretel Killeen. Thanks for joining us. Good night.